Rhythm Changes is partnered with the Inlet Music Series in my local Tri-Cities in Port Moody on March 21st. That's the next edition of the monthly series. Every time there's a concert here, I have a wonderful excuse to interview the artist who is coming. And this time it is none other than host of the national radio show Saturday Night Jazz on CBC, Juno winner as a solo artist, multiple Juno nominee, and recently a Grammy nominee for her latest album, Wintersongs. So please welcome Laila Biali.
All right. Thanks for that intro.
It's great to be with you. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm a little tuckered out. I think that even 2.5 weeks following my first Grammys experience, my nervous system is still recovering, but it's good. I'm really happy. I'm so happy to be speaking with you.
Have you always felt, or maybe this has changed here, let's think about it this way. At this point in your now extensive career, travels, touring, recording artist history, do you find that you're the kind of person who more gets energized along the way by going on this crazy campaign, like thinking about the Grammys, and then, you know, afterwards you can crash? Yeah, that's fine. I know we know about that, but while you're in it, do you get energized by being on such a grand project like that, or do you want the alone time? Is there a more introvert angle to it at this point in your life?
I am essentially an introvert who presents as extroverted, which means that the alone time is where I find my fuel. However, you are not wrong. When I'm touring or part of an awards weekend, there's a bit of a momentum that just carries me through, and the energy feeds itself in a way, replenishes itself. And I would say that there's just a lot of excitement all around. But I have to also find ways to stay grounded. Otherwise, I might just spin off. Yeah.
Yeah. Wintersongs, wonderful project. The track that stands out the most in my memory is actually the last track, Jesus, He is Born. And this is like, it's the Huron Carol, right? It's like a down tempo Huron Carol.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, what a journey with that particular song, given its history. It was initially, well, it reaches back to like ancient Italy and or ancient France in terms of like the folk melody. However, it was a Jesuit priest who was with the Wendat people, like I want to say it was during the 1600s, who then turned it into the song that many of us know and love. However, there's an English translation that's very popular that I would say our Indigenous friends take exception to. And so I love that song. I love the melody. And actually, I even loved the English lyrics. They were very poetic and beautiful. But before long, I began with a residency at the Banff Center where I met Jeremy Dutcher. And I asked him about the song, which he's also covered, actually. And that set me on a journey to connect with a Wendat or Wendake artist, André Levesque-Suey, who took a lot of time with me. And we actually met with a scholar on the song and a choral writer who, together with André and this other scholar who's no longer with us, they have worked to decolonize the song. And so ultimately, the question for me was, can I actually share this song without creating further harm? And so André really encouraged me, helped me unpack the history and the path she's been carving out moving forward. And so we landed on an instrumental version, so the lyrics wouldn't be in the mix, that English translation. And André has actually written a totally brand new version that I would encourage folks to check out, although it hasn't been recorded. But if you do a little research, you can find her rewriting of that song, and she uses the Wendat title, Jesus Ahatonia. But for my version, she said, you know what, I would give it the English title so it doesn't get mixed up with what I'm doing. And so that's why it's called Jesus, He is Born. So that was a very long-winded way of, giving a bit of context for the song that struck you, which is super cool. I'm glad to hear that.
I love that. That's such an interesting window into the whole project, because it is a fascinating project with all the people he brought together on record too. Like there's strings and there's guest instrumentalists, and that's just one track of many, and yet there's this rich story that you've woven into it. So it's great.
Yeah, well, and we almost didn't include it on the album because we were worried that we would do it in a way that maybe would look performative or wrong. And ultimately, we felt it was right and good to include it with André's blessing.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about now times you've played in Vancouver recently, and I can think of two off the top of my head. So one, you came to another venue that is quite close to where I live, which is the Evergreen in Coquitlam. And before that, you came as a featured vocalist among three others of the Ostara Project at McGee Secondary School for a concert there, co-presented by Infidels Jazz, and I was there. And what I remember from that show in particular, and this is a cool thing about the Ostara Project, I would say, that you've been involved in, was you stood up from the piano. I mean, you were at the piano too. You stood up from the piano next to Shruti Ramani, and you had this interesting interaction as two vocalists, two completely different personalities and stories, shining next to each other. It was so fun.
I think that she is extraordinary. So she might be, not quite young enough to be my daughter, but almost, and like definitely the next generation. And she is so respectful and just an amazing person. But when I stand next to her, I feel that I am in the presence of a master, young as she is, because she began her journey as a vocalist in India when she was a kid. And if I recall correctly, she would spend hours upon hours a day with a guru, master teacher, learning her craft. And that's what she brings to the stage and to her beautiful presentation of art. Yeah, so you probably registered there was a bit of awe in me. There always is when I'm next to Shruti.
Well, I mean, the other side of it is there's no doubt that she would have felt the same way about you, which is the cool thing about the format.
Yeah, that shocks and humbles me, but that's the beautiful thing of what Ostara has created, right? And something so unique to the great Jodi Proznick and Amanda Tosoff, who initially created that group.
And then when you came, I think it was the same year. I think it was 2024 and not last year, because I was looking over the gig list archives, and it's possible I've missed, but I don't know if you played in Vancouver in 2025.
Ooh, yes, I did.
Yeah?
No, not in 2025. Forgive me. We did Coquitlam in July of 2024, and then we presented Wintersongs at Capilano University the following December, when Taylor Swift was also in town.
Right, yes. Yeah. Evergreen was the one that I heard, and you had Jodi Proznick and your husband, Ben Wittman, and you played a variety of things there, and that was really nice. It was an intimate setting for you as well. And then you're right, there was this kind of grand Wintersongs show that you also did, yeah.
That's right. And notably, at both concerts, I was working through a vocal injury. And so it was really vulnerable to get on stage. It was quite terrifying, in fact. But I've now learned to negotiate what has been going on with my voice. It's much better, thankfully. But yeah, those are two shows that for me stand out because of what was happening behind the scenes at the time.
Have I actually had the chance to tell you about the first couple times I heard you? Like, this would go back several years or something, when I was introduced to your music.
I don't know. You have to refresh my memory. I'm curious now.
I was trying to think of the exact year, but I'm quite sure the first time I would have heard of you was when one of my great band teachers, which I was lucky to have several at New Westminster Secondary School, Kelly Proznick, brought you in, and I was in my first year of vocal jazz at New Westminster Secondary. And I think would have been maybe 2011. I think you came. I think that was the first time.
Was that when I also played like an art gallery?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Holy cow. Incredible. That's a long time ago, 15 years ago.
So there was a space in the theater in New West, the Massey Theater. So our school band room at the time, they built a new one now, but at the time was attached to the Massey Theater. And they also had this gallery space in the theater lobby. And I'm pretty sure you played there.
Yep, totally. I would have been on a keyboard, I think. And we just were making it happen, how we could make it happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you would have been younger then than I am now.
Right, exactly. Well, how old are, yeah, exactly. If you do the math, that lines up. But that's so cool, and you would have been maybe around my son's age, or maybe a little older. My son is now 15. So
I was about to graduate probably, so like 17 or so.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Well,
Huh.
I'll tell you, Kelly Proznick and Jodi Proznick and their whole family, I mean, they have made such an imprint on the BC scene, and now through Jodi, Canada-wide and also internationally. I mean, maybe there's something in the water in the lower mainland of BC and the island, frankly.
Well, there's a second chapter to it actually, which is after that point. I think, well, my mom became a big fan of yours, and we took home some CDs that day. I'm pretty sure, which were some of your early albums. But then in 2012, I go with my high school band program to Music Fest Canada, the annual event for music students, which at the time it was in Ottawa. So we traveled to Ottawa, and I was playing with some of my friends on some of their scholarship auditions. I was playing bass, and there was a vocalist in particular who was a classmate of mine at New West, and we were trying to figure out what she wanted to play for her scholarship audition. And you had just done your album live in concert. And so we lifted your version of I'll Never Smile Again with George Kohler.
No way. Oh, that's so nice to hear. I think we don't often get glimpses of how our music may have impacted the next generations unless they tell us, as you are now. And that's just so nice to hear, because I think that sometimes our reach can feel really limited in the jazz world compared to that of, pop stars and top 100 Billboard artists. And for me, the really meaningful stuff is really like, as you just described, how are we impacting the next generation, especially in jazz, because it's an art form that we think of and that many folks think of as dated. And so if we're able to keep it current and moving forward and getting the next generations excited, then that's good. That's a win. That's a net win.
You know all about that, no doubt, because of the award-winning and award-nominated projects you've done in your solo career have brought in pop elements. And I'm sure that it got taken to another level when you got to go to the Grammys in the capacity that you did recently. And I'm sure this is something that you've had several occasions to talk about, kind of on both sides of the media tour, so to speak, like on the way in and on the way out. But now that you've had at least a week or two to reflect on it, like, what do you think you're going to carry with you about being in that big room or being in that space? You're talking about jazz compared to pop stars, and here you are in the epicenter of both. What do you think you're going to recall and carry with you from this experience now that it's been just a little bit of time to look back on it?
Yeah, it's really interesting because in hindsight, and while I was there, I was struck by the community element. And I got to meet and hang with some of my jazz friends and heroes from, Nicole Zaritis, who's won a couple times and has been nominated, I believe, 5 times now, fellow singer, pianist, songwriter, who kind of, blends genres, to Christian McBride, who called me on the last day of the Grammy voting period, like shocked me. He texted me. I thought, how in the world did he even get my number? And before I knew it, this is October 15th of last year, I'm on the phone just chatting with Christian McBride for a solid half hour.
Wow.
And then he was one of the only people there were tons of folks on the red carpet, but so many faces from various genres. But his, of course, I recognized, and we got to have our moment. And so just to go back to your question, I was just reminded that we're all working so hard. And while that red carpet Grammy Juno moment carries with it its unique reward and rewards, plural, at the end of the day, it's really about the music. And so that's what I return to time and again. And I have been nominated and I've been passed over the past, 25 plus years. And so I know what it is to be part of that amazing awards experience. And I also know what it is to be at home feeling a little bit like I'm missing out. And so it's always a sobering reminder that at the end of the day, it's about the music, it's about the work. And but of course, it's a boost. It's always a boost to get a Grammy or a Juno nomination.
This could be kind of a weird jump on the same theme, but like if you imagine yourself in like if this had happened to you in your early to mid 20s, how different do you think it is now that it's happened to you at this stage?
I will tell you, I feel like it's so much sweeter now and deeper for me on the one hand. On the other hand, I don't take it with a grain of salt, but I'm like, oh, okay. Like, we've done that. That's so wonderful. How fortunate I am to have had that experience. I'd love to have it again. But yeah, I would say that at 45, I no longer expected to get a Grammy nomination in my career. I had sort of let go of that dream, if you want to call it that. And in my younger years, I didn't think of it as inevitable, but I was definitely excited at the prospect and had no idea all that was involved. And now I know more about that as well, the process, right? Which I think eludes a lot of artists, and especially up here in Canada, because it could not be more different from the Junos. With the Junos, you've got jurors who are essentially, none of them are aware of one another. There's like a code of silence and everybody is evaluating the same material. And I'm sure there's a discussion of what the criteria is. And with the Grammys, you have to become a voting member of the Recording Academy. And now there are, I think, more than 15,000 of us. Or you get entered by a Recording Academy member. So the very first time I got entered into the Grammys was, I believe in 2020. There was a woman named Judy Wexler who heard my album Out of Dust, and she decided to enter it into the Grammys. And that was the very first year I had my Grammy for Your Consideration campaign experience, which is essentially artists just campaigning for their projects, which is how they do it at the Oscars and the Golden Globes. And it's just this whole other world. And that year I got moved into pop, not traditional pop, but pop, where I was next to Justin Bieber and Beyonce, which was just, to me, was so absurd. And I still campaigned the way that I knew to, but in the ensuing several years, I started to learn more about how that process could and should look. But it's still very different, and I've been chatting with a lot of friends and peers about the whole experience from start to finish.
Yeah, that's an interesting comparison to the way the Juno works. That makes sense. And yeah, pretty crazy if you were in full-on pop. The only person we can think of is like Esperanza Spalding at the beginning of her career, but that's it.
That's right. And she wasn't even in pop. She was just Best New Artist. And she beat out Justin Bieber. And I knew people who were touring with her at the time, and she was getting hate mail and death threats from Justin Bieber fans. I mean, this is what can go on behind the scenes. And funnily enough, Justin Bieber performed at the telecast when we were in LA a couple weeks ago. He was actually pretty great. So no shade to the Biebs, but that was a coup for Esperanza Spalding, right? At the time. Huge.
Yeah, I remember I looked at this because I wrote about a concert when she came to play here last year. I think the field for that category that year was Justin Bieber, Drake, Mumford and Sons, and Florence and the Machine, or something like that.
Like, truly incredible. And in that instance, she broke through because of her artistry. She's an unbelievable artist, and she obviously had enough cred with Recording Academy members, voting members, to break through in what must have been a very difficult race, given the fact that for us, she's a household name as jazz people. But if I asked my sister if she knew who Esperanza Spalding was, her answer would be no.
And that speaks to the reach and it's not even about the genre of music. It's just kind of about the professional space or the commercial space and who you associate with and how that kind of gets settled over time. Who knows who, and breaking across those is very challenging. Yeah.
Absolutely. I would be so fascinated to sit down with Michael Bublé or Jon Batiste. Like, those are guys who have broken into the mainstream, and really have carved out their own path, but they come from jazz, especially Jon Batiste, right? And it would be fascinating to have that conversation with them.
Yeah. So let's take it back home here, or at least for me. So the Inlet show, who's playing with you? I think I already heard that Jodi's playing with you, but who's going to be playing with you?
Yeah, so my husband, Ben Wittman, will be with me, and that's always a treat. Jodi Proznick will be on bass, and joining me for the first time, Jon Bentley on sax.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Look forward to that.
It's going to be awesome. I'm a big fan of his. We play his music on Saturday Night Jazz on CBC, and I've long wanted to collaborate with him. So this is my chance.
That's excellent. Yeah, the show, I see it billed as Joni Mitchell and the Canadian Songbook reinvented, and then you have named a couple of Canadian legends who would constitute the Canadian Songbook arrangements that you're bringing to the table. But who do you want to point to as some of the things that we're going to hear at this show on that theme?
Yeah, so I started digging into the Canadian Songbook when you first heard me back in 2011, and a few years before that. In fact, we would likely have been promoting From Sea to Sky still at that time. And so we've dusted off that songbook as a starting place for this tour. But I need to say that at present, and over the past few months, I've been developing a new Canadian songbook relative to that first iteration released in 2008, that features work by a number of Indigenous artists, including Jeremy Dutcher, Kaylee Cardinal, William Prince, and trying to represent music of multiple generations from coast to coast to coast. That's the goal of Dreamland, which will be the name of my next record when it comes out. But it's not going to come out probably until early 2027. So to answer your question, at the Inlet Theatre, it will be some of those older Canadian songbook tunes, so including Jane Siberry, Bruce Cockburn, certainly Leonard Cohen, and some newer Joni Mitchell arrangements. So I now have, I think, 8 or 9 Joni tunes, several of which are new and have never been recorded. So we'll definitely unveil some fresh material at the Inlet Theatre. And I might throw in a couple of my own tunes, which is a little cheeky, but technically I'm a Canadian, so it fits. And but otherwise, really putting the spotlight on other writers.
That's so cool. I don't mean to force a direct comparison between you and this other artist, but when I think about you delivering these kind of concepts in your music and in your shows, there is an album that I really cherished from my childhood, again with my mom, that she and I would have listened to, which is Katie Lang's Hymns of the 49th Parallel.
It's a favorite. So when I did From Sea to Sky, I had not even heard Hymns from the 49th Parallel. Or is it Hymns to the 49th Parallel?
It's of, I think, yeah.
Hymns of, okay. So, but I love that album so much. And in fact, Jodi Proznick has wanted me to cover The Valley, which is on that album. But
that's my favorite track, yeah.
Oh, I mean, that album is, I don't know that anyone else will ever put out a Canadian songbook album that can rival the depth of what Katie released with that project. It's so, every song is sung as if she wrote it herself, but there's still a spirit of reverence. Like, I feel that she, as she embodies and covers these songs, there's such reverence in her towards the original writers. It's also one of my favorites. It's such a beautiful record. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that she sung them all like as if she wrote them herself, because there's no doubt, like if I first heard that when I was 10, that the first times that I was hearing many of those songs would have been there, and then finding the original versions later. Yeah.
Exactly. And I've had that experience a few times. Like, I did not know about Ron Sexsmith, who I cover, and I discovered him because of Feist's cover of Secret Heart on her album Let It Die. And it's so different from how Ron does it. And I love both versions, but for From Sea to Sky, my Canadian Songbook album, I went back to all the original versions of the songs I was covering. I felt it was really important to make sure I touched base with how the song was initially conceived. And I'm trying to do that again, obviously, for Dreamland. But yeah, it's fun to see the other covers that are out there.
Yeah. So I think this show is almost sold out. There may or may not be tickets available by the time I air this. So we'll see if we do end up pointing anybody new to it, or if it's already going to be a full house who's excited to see you. But I wanted to wrap up by pointing to a couple other things that are in the outside layer of things that we're doing here. And one of them is, before you really got into the prime of the Grammy campaign over the winter here, you posted about Canada Council grants, or about receiving grants in particular. But if I recall what you talked about in this video, where you kind of went in depth on your feelings at the time on the subject, you were kind of putting out a call to artists about what are we all doing to sustain ourselves in the best way, given where the landscape has gone. And people had different views about that, and a lot of artists responded to you, and you started a conversation very quickly about this, that to continue it, you kind of had to continue it in the background, because what moved into the foreground, maybe days later, was the Grammy for your consideration. So what would you point to now about what you heard from artists about this landscape, about grants, and about how we're moving forward with our projects?
Yeah, I think this is a huge conversation, and I was shocked by how much traction that one post got. And initially, I just wanted to be public that I had been rejected, actually a number of times that year, 2025, for funding for this next project, this Canadian Songbook project. And other people were posting too, and it wasn't to complain or to whine or to criticize the system, but truly, as you said, to ask the question, well, now what? Because I confess that I have become heavily reliant upon grant funding. And now, I certainly have not received every grant I've applied for, but I've had a really high success rate over the past decade or so. Wintersongs was, other than Factor, heavily funded by Canada Council, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council. And I would not have been able to do with that album what I did in the time frame that it took without that support. At least I don't think I would have. So now I'm in a situation where I have a project that's similarly ambitious, and I don't necessarily want to downgrade to some scaled down vision. I want to keep that vision. And so, the things that emerged over social media that other artists were sharing, there was a lot of complaining, and a lot of people, frankly, who felt really discouraged. Some were saying, I've left music because of this. And actually, I tried as much as I could to dialogue with some artists who were feeling particularly discouraged over private direct messenger, to encourage them in what ways I could. And vice versa. Some people reached out to me and said, hey, I've tried this or I've tried that. And so I was hearing, some of these things we already are aware of, but patronage models come up quite a bit. I feel like we use them less in Canada. Like, I know a number of artists in the States who use Patreon, which is sort of subscriber based, where you're putting out exclusive content, but you design what that content is. And then you have subscribers who pay a certain amount monthly, and they get access to this content, or they get early content or exclusive content. And I don't know what the metrics are on that, but I think some folks are nearly making a living from that kind of thing because they've worked so hard to build up their base. I did hear from a couple people about business loans, which I never would have considered, and is certainly its own can of worms. And, there are other patronage models. Believe it or not, there are still some old school arts patrons out there, or organizations who are looking to partner with artists. And I'm fortunate where I actually am part of a charitable community called Imago, through which I can give tax receipts to anybody who donates to my project. It's called the Radiance Project. You know, and I don't know that that's something that's available to most artists, but there are still patrons out there. And I remember hearing that even Taylor Swift has like investors and patrons, right? You would think that she would have all the resources in the world to carry through, you know, whatever she wants to do in terms of touring and vision and albums, et cetera. But she still has investors and patrons. And Sting did as well. When he was developing his Broadway musical, The Last Ship, he was working with investors and patrons. And I think as artists, we just go, that's not going to happen for me. But I played Al Muirhead's 90th birthday show at the National Music Center in Calgary, and right there in the front row was a family that had funded his album. And so I think we have to just do away with fear, I would say, or like preemptive defeat, like, oh, that's just not an option. Now, in terms of the grant systems themselves, I had a really long and in-depth conversation with a grants officer from Canada Council. And so my next step, and I had wanted to do this at the time, but as you said, the Grammys totally hijacked the following 3 or so months of my life. But I want to come back and I want to do a video on a few key arts councils that I've had experience with, bringing some new information to the table publicly in terms of how things have changed. Because I do think it's helpful to know for artists, because a lot of people were just like, I can't be successful under this new system that Canada Council has launched, because they shut down their portal for several months. I think had a bunch of conversations about how to relaunch, changed programs, et cetera, changed the whole model effectively. And many artists, including myself, were like, uh-oh, this may now be impenetrable. It's not. We just have to approach it a little bit differently. So I will share about that coming to a social media platform near you shortly.
That's a fascinating overview of what was going on. Thank you. As somebody, I've never applied for a Canada Council grant before, even though I suppose I have many friends who have, but to hear from your perspective about what was going on was really interesting. Yeah.
Have you done Creative BC? Because I've heard
many. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Because that's the one. I mean, Alberta Arts. So what I've been hearing, and this is one last point I'll make, a lot of artists who are used to having success with Factor, Canada Council, the national funding bodies, when they haven't had success, Katie George included, she did not get I think she'd be okay with me saying this because she said it publicly.
She told me in her interview on her project. Yeah.
But Alberta Arts Council, or whatever the equivalent is in Alberta, came through. And I imagine that the National Music Center has been, I would hope, generous in providing her a good rate or access to the space, et cetera. But anyway, there is a lot of funding available at the local, municipal, and provincial level that I think some artists overlook. So that's great. I'm really happy to hear you've done Creative BC.
Yeah, I mean, there is another distinction, I suppose, which is like all the experience I've had in recent years working on various grant applications has been from the applicants being companies, like especially Cellar, because most of my work is with Cellar and Corey Weeds. So I haven't done a lot of individual artists. You know, maybe I've had friends who have asked me for some pointers or something, but really I've worked on like companies like Cellar's grants applications. So I don't have a lot of current experience from the individual artist standpoint. Yeah, to be fair.
Well, and interestingly, so Cellar, what's their umbrella now? The name has changed a few times. It's not Cellar Live anymore. What is it?
Cellar Music Group. Yeah, includes, that and other things.
Cellar Music Group. I mean, Corey is one of the most enterprising people I've ever met in my life, on top of being a formidable musician. And, you know, he was booking Frankie's for a long time, and now he's got a partnership, I think, with Shad Bolt, and he's just always doing a zillion things at the highest level. So a label like his and a label like Chronograph in Alberta, and, you know, I'd say still to some degree Just in Time in Quebec, and a few others, you know, and for me, actually partnering with Emily Claire Barlow, who has her own label, Empress Music Group, and works with the distributor Believe. She's really mentored and helped me. But the people who run these labels and so on, they're surprisingly generous. They're like among the busiest people that I've ever met and know. but they're really generous with the information they have. And in some cases, Cellar and Chronograph, et cetera, they're always looking for artists to get behind. So, I would continue to also encourage artists to pitch their projects to boutique labels in Canada that themselves might be getting enough funding to be able to then, get behind an artist's new project.
Yeah, absolutely. Come to Cellar, come do it. If your music is at all a fit, people know what Cellar music is supposed to sound like. So if your music resembles that in any way, come on down.
Yeah, they're definitely blazing trails. I mean, they won a Grammy a couple years ago for one of their projects, right? Stephen Feifke, I think. And every time a Cellar project comes across my desk at Saturday Night Jazz, I'm excited because I know the quality will be there.
Thank you for setting me up there, because I have to go out with that as a media person in this community that we're in. How is it feeling for you at this point in your run hosting Saturday Night Jazz? And can you just talk about that a little bit? Because, sometimes this is a funny duality where you do something like this, you get to talk to a lot of other people, and then you turn off the camera and you're like, oh, there's actually like a lonely side of this, because there's only a few people who are trying to do things like this. I mean, my content and my profile are both extremely different from yours, and I am not approaching the scope or the scale of Saturday Night Jazz myself whatsoever. I'm kind of doing something else, but as a some of the people in the tech world would lump us all in as creators anyway. So how are you doing at this point in your Saturday Night Jazz journey? How's it feeling?
No, 100%. You and I are on the same plane in that regard. And in fact, I give props to you because you're interviewing people. I don't interview people on Saturday Night Jazz, although I will live at Juno's weekend coming up on March 28th. Right. So that's super exciting. But to answer your question, I was saying to my husband the other day, I cannot believe that I've been hosting that show for 8.5 years, since 2017. And what a gift. CBC does things a little differently. Most shows have a dedicated producer who selects and programs the music, which some folks don't necessarily want to know. Like they feel it's my show, it's my voice, I'm telling the stories, I write the script, and they want to feel that I've also chosen all the music. But a woman named Lauren Hancock does that. And she's a huge jazz person, and we've been working now together for more than 8 years. And in that sense, it's great because I actually get to discover artists and music that I maybe wouldn't have found on my own because my time is limited. And so Lauren, God bless her, gets, hundreds of submissions monthly. There might even be times where it's pushing into the thousands because CBC is a behemoth in its reach nationally. But I never take it for granted that I still have that gig because, as you probably know, and as your listeners know, CBC is an organization that has gone through lots of change and has sort of come under threat. Some of the programming has come under threat now and then, but we've hung in there as the only terrestrial national jazz show. And so in that sense, I see it as a huge privilege. Like what a privilege to get to share music and stories and reach ears across the country once a week for 4 hours. It's just, it's awesome. Yeah.
Is there anything else among your many activities that is on your mind that you wanted to shout out or point to while we were on here before we wrap?
On a personal note, not to keep going back to Jodi, but I'm such a fan. I'm such a fan of hers. And one of the reasons that I admire her so much is because she not only succeeds in music, but she is an incredible mom and a beautiful wife and friend and daughter and sister. And she takes seriously her humanity, who she is as a human. And so from the beginning, watching her when her son, Tristan, was just a wee thing and so brilliant, like a bona fide genius. And then along came my son a couple years after Tristan. I've learned so much from watching her, and trying to juggle parenting and music remains a challenge. And she's just been such a beautiful and shining mentor and example in that regard, to not be afraid to put family first and to allow for one's pace and trajectory in music to look a little different so that the priorities stay in their appropriate place. And that's an ongoing journey and lesson for me.
That's very beautifully said. It's a privilege that we get to see both of you on stage again in Vancouver very soon. So thanks for joining me today, and we look forward to when you come here.
You're much beloved, Will, for your show and all that you do for the community, truly. So thanks again for having me. It's always a treat to speak with you.